Welcome to the EchoCast. I am Bon Diesel. This is episode 57. The EchoCast is a Division and Division 2 podcast based on talking about the news, speculating a bit, and then a smattering of my opinions, for better or for worse. If you're new, welcome. I hope you enjoy. If you're returning, welcome back. It's good to have you. Let's jump in. So today we will talk about the state of the game summary, some Division 2 news from this week, a little bit of story and lore speculation, and a few listener questions at the end. If you want to support this podcast and my other content, you can do it via Patreon. You can check out the EchoCast on Patreon at patreon.com/theechocast. Right now, through the end of May, anyone who becomes a patron will get 3 free stickers mailed to them. It's a Bon Diesel, the EchoCast, and a Division 2 Hub sticker. So check it out if you want. If not, it's all good. Okay, so let's jump into the state of the game recap. This week we had Hamish and Rasmus, mostly talking about some gameplay changes coming, and specifically recalibration changes. Rasmus, recalibration, crafting, that kind of thing was kind of his deal. So in the PTS, there's ongoing changes happening, and people from all parts of the game are checking it out. They talked a bit about how the PTS is looked at by the devs and how they use it. The big thing I picked up from it was that it obviously affects changes now, but it also affects changes in the long run, because not everything they find can necessarily be fixed, by the next patch. There may be things they identify for later. So then they talked a bit about clarifying how drops will happen, at least in the PTS and probably in the final patch, about how you won't get so many drops below your current average. I know I'm at level 500 on my main farming build, and I'm getting drops that are like 490 and stuff like that. I don't mind as much. The RNG is fine to me, but I understand why it's such a big departure from the last game, and it's just annoying for people who don't have that much time to farm. So it looks like they're planning on making pretty much all drops your level or above. They did talk about how the high-end gear will now max out at 515, and the superior gear will max out at 490. The purple gear, can't go above 490. They do still want the purple gear to be useful, mostly because it can drop higher stat rolls because it has fewer of them. So the purple gear should still be useful to in-game people to pull over for recalibration, which is what they talked about after that. Which is, now there's going to be a recalibration score for each piece. So instead of having these hard caps like we currently have in the recalibration, you're now going to have so the way it seems like it's going to work is that if you have a piece of gear that has a few decent stat rolls on it, and you move a god roll to it, you'll be able to move the whole god roll over. Now, there's still going to be a cap because of this recalibration score. So say you have a piece that already has a perfect roll on weapon damage. If you try to move a perfect skill power roll over, the fact that the first piece already has a perfect weapon damage roll, that recalibration score is going to be high already. I think this is how it's going to work. So then if you try to move another god roll over to that first piece, it won't move at all because it's going to run out of recalibration score. So I like the system. I think it's going to keep people from having these hilariously OP pieces, but it still will reward moving stuff over and using that system. So Hamish pointed out that the 515 gear score will not be the gear that has 515 will not be exclusive to the DZ, but did not clarify where else it will drop. So, over the last week, there was a lot of discussion. It was, joy and happiness by the DZ people who are happy to have a reason to go into the DZ. not so much excitement from people who don't want to DZ, and I think everyone kind of predicted this. I don't think anyone really thought that you would only get 515 gear from the DZ. I suspect, and this is only me guessing, but we'll also get it from probably heroic missions, definitely from the raid. I doubt we'll get it from like level 4 control points, but maybe. The thing is though, is that like I saw some people proposing that, well, only the raid should drop 515 gear because there's not as much risk in PvE, and the problem is that that makes the DZ really the only useful place to go get it, because while the DZ definitely has the risk of being killed by other players, that loop of looting, extracting, all of that, for the most part you would be able to grind 10 times the gear, more than likely, from the DZ than you would the raid. Unless, I don't know exact drop numbers and all that, but for the most part, in the DZ, you can either avoid people and get out, or just keep going around trying to find a server that doesn't have many people in it, or just find a group of 4 that you want to extract with, and you'll probably be able to farm 515 gear pretty efficiently. But maybe, I don't know. So I think it's good that they clarified that it's going to be in more than one spot. I do hope that they make it relatively exclusive, though. They did say that the gear and skill mods will have a similar power. They currently have similar power distribution, and they want people to prefer high-end mods. This was kind of on the subject of the blue mods having like way better stats than purple and high-end. But they do want the high end to obviously be preferred. They do want the superior mods, the purple ones, to have a use, but they kind of said it without saying it, that they really didn't intend for like blue level mods to be like the best ones to use. So I suspect we'll see some changes with that. They did mention a really big change, and that the skill mods will have a battery skill mod now. So say your turret has 3 mod slots. Right now you put in like a damage mod slot, a cooldown reduction, and an ammo one, so it can shoot for longer before it has to reload, something like that. Well, now you'll be able to drop a battery mod into one of those slots, so you'll lose one of your ability slots, but what you will gain is pure skill power for that skill. So say you're running a build that has 0 skill power, but you want to be able to run some really, a couple really low level mods on one of your skills, you can drop a battery into it, which gives that skill power on its own. And then you can, have a couple low level skill mods that will work on the skill. I like this because it basically means that you, can have some more usefulness out of your skills, but it doesn't look like it's going to be like, you won't be able to unlock the best skill mods with just using these batteries. I suspect you can only use 1 battery per skill, and even if you can use 2 on most of the skills, that will leave 1 spot open, so you can get like 1 really good skill mod unlocked, and that's it. So I think it's going to make skills more viable, more interesting to use. I hope it doesn't get abused in any way, but hopefully people are testing that out in the PTS. They talked about how the crafting NPC will now be a vendor for mod blueprints, and for other blueprints. I really like this new system. So we'll still have blueprints dropping from weekly projects and control points, but you will be able to purchase them as well from Anaya, I think, is the crafting person specialist, who will now be a vendor. So I think that's going to be good overall. You can still get mods from the control points and from projects, but she'll be another source for those. At the end, they kind of dropped a few extra things about how like the weapon ammo drops are being looked at and improved. Rasmus dropped a few extra little details at the end, talking about how gray material limits will be raised. The hardwired gear set will now craft at a higher gear score, I think like 480 and up or something. He said something along those lines, where now it can craft as low as 450. So you've grinded for all of those pieces, and then you craft them, and it's like world tier 4 stuff. So hopefully that gets fixed up, and then that weapons will sort automatically in the recalibration recalibration station now. So instead of having kind of a smattering of stuff, now we'll have that. So that was State of the Game. I thought it was informative. I get that not everyone is always completely satisfied with the information we get. They, at the end of the day, no matter how much info they gave us, there'd be a population of people who would want more. But I think that they've been good. I saw some complaints. If you don't know, on my Twitter, I do a live tweet of the State of the Game every week. I take my lunch at work and I watch it and eat and tweet stuff out that they're talking about. And I got a reply on there from someone who said, this is what's wrong with State of the Game. It ignores all of the issues with the game and just talks about what they want to talk about. I think maybe that's a misunderstanding of what State of the Game is to me. I mean, I've been watching it for a couple of years now, and when they'll bring up issues like in the community when it's necessary, but for the most part, I think it's smart for them to just pick the topics that seem to be popular, talk about how they're trying to work on them, acknowledge them, but not sit and just go through every single little issue people are complaining about and talking about. It's State of the Game, not State of the Community. So I think it's ignorant to assume that they don't recognize a lot of the issues with the game. I think that they hear us loud and clear, for better or worse. But I think that it's okay for each State of the Game to more focus on specific things. I mean, we are getting these opportunities to have these devs come on and stuff like that and talk about it. Just because you don't agree with them doesn't mean it's like bad information. But that's just my opinion. Okay, so Division news. I'm going to talk a little bit about the PTS Phase 2, Twitch viewer base dropping, and raid date speculation. So PTS Phase 2, they specified some areas. They just released the update. I believe it was on Thursday or Friday. I think it was Thursday. Maybe it was Wednesday. I don't know. So they specified with recalibration, they want people to test out the new system and compare it to the old one. With the Reviver Hive, they want people to test out its reliability and see if they're still having issues with it. With getting stuck just on like random stuff in the world and stuff like that, they want people to test it out, and if they find places where they're still getting stuck, to take screenshots or videos and post it to the forums. With control points, they want people to test the adjusted difficulty of the control points, specifically at the level 3 and 4. With missions, they want people to test out like the difficulty and sponginess of the enemies, but they did specify that like the heroic level of the invaded missions is meant to be really challenging, and it's not supposed to be as easy as like a normal, hard, even challenging level mission. There's a ton of specific changes that they put out there. I'm looking at them now. I don't really want to go through every single one of them. I highly encourage you guys to check out. I believe the official forums has them listed out, and the Tom Clancy thedivision.ubisoft.com, the main website, has it under the news and videos section. I mean, there's a ton of stuff here. The big thing is to look at the specific talent and weapon talent changes they're making. I'm seeing, wow, I don't know what that sound was, I'm sorry. There's a bunch of changes that specify PvE and PvP. I know there's been a lot of discussion on whether or not that's possible, because they said it was before the game came out. So I would look at those, and I suspect they kind of wanted to release with everything being the same and then adjust as needed. And I'm seeing here 4, 5, 6 different talents, just talents, that are being changed. We know from the State of the Game last week that there's even like damage modifiers that are going to be different and stuff like that as well. So I suggest checking it out, and if you're in the PTS, I highly suggest testing those changes. But yeah, for the specifics, I mean, I didn't really see anything that I really wanted to throw out there. Actually, I don't remember them talking about this. The TAC 50 now has two different zoom states. Hopefully one of those is like 8x and the other one's like the 15x. I get why there's a 15x scope on the TAC 50, because it's cool and it's gigantic, and it's probably what it really has. But for this game and the engagement distances that you're normally dealing with, that 15x scope is a bit much. So maybe like, I would even say like a 6x and like a 12x would be plenty, but what do I know? And then like the conflict changes, the PvP changes, dark zone changes. People got to test them out. So if you're on PC, you can get into the PTS for free, and I highly suggest doing it and checking it out. Even if you just go in and look at these lists of changes and test them out, that's a big help to the community. If you do test those things out, you find anything, be sure to post it to the official forums. You can post stuff on Reddit and YouTube and Twitter. It may get noticed, but it may not as well. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the times that stuff gets posted to social media, but not to the forums. It kind of makes me curious about how seriously people want things to be fixed. And maybe they, aren't as worried about that, and maybe a little bit more worried about being noticed. But who knows? I saw some comments this week about the Twitch viewer base dropping. And the argument is that that since the PvP is bad, it's mostly people playing PvE. Therefore, the viewer base drops because people don't like to watch PvE. So there may be some credence to that, but what I would say is, from my experience, as someone who I consider a fairly normal Twitch viewer, I watch lots of different streamers, mostly bigger ones, to be totally honest. And I watch like Shroud because he's really good at the games he plays, I guess. I mean, he is, but that's not necessarily why I watch him. I think he's kind of funny. I like his personality. I enjoy watching him for a lot of reasons. Now, obviously, there's no one in the Division community who's as big as Shroud, so it's hard to compare, apples to oranges. But my whole thing is that I've seen plenty of PvE streamers with other games and Division who are just as interesting, if not more so, than the average PvP streamer. You can have someone who's really good at PvP, someone like Wids and stuff like that. They're genuinely fun to watch because they're just talented. They're just good. But I also think that you can have someone who streams PvE content, who's engaging the community a lot, has interesting things, is maybe funny, has a unique way of presenting information in their stream. At the end of the day, what I'm getting at is that a PvP and a PvE streamer can both be equally boring. In a lot of ways, especially in Division 1, I know, the PvP in Division 1 to me became just as repetitive as anything in the PvE side of the game. At the end of the day, definitely a little more variety, I'll give it that. But at the end of the day, one PvP fight next to the next one didn't look that much different. And so I think, it depends on what people are there for. It depends on what, the streamer is bringing to the table. And I really don't think that we should necessarily blame, the PvP maybe not being ideal right now for the complete, for some drop off in the viewer base, which has dropped quite a bit. I think it's only averaging like 4,000 viewers a day, which, isn't awful, but still isn't great for a game that just came out. But at the same time, with all of the looter shooter games, they seem to kind of die off a little bit between updates. So, and if you look at the list of viewership on Twitch and so on, it tends to be high level strategy games and BRs. I just don't think Division 2 really presents either of those things. Obviously, you've got games like Counter-Strike and stuff like that. Even I think Destiny 2 is still kind of creeping up there a little bit. Warframe used to dominate the viewership, and it was strictly PvE. They just gave up on their PvP. Now, that was probably a little bit due to some, I think, a little bit shady things they're doing with streams, but with drops and stuff. But what I will say, my last point about the viewer base thing is, I think the only real chance for Division 2 to really have like a consistently high viewer base for an extended amount of time is going to be if they bring out some type of survival mode that is more BR-ish than the first game was. Not completely. I think they need to stick with a lot of what Survival did right. But I see a lot of people talk about Survival and how they need to bring it back, and I even get some feeling that people want it to be exactly the same as the first game. And I think that's a huge mistake, because while I know a lot of us, including myself, really enjoyed Survival in the first game, there's absolutely zero denying that it had a tiny little player base. And it was definitely fun to watch in a lot of streams for a while. It got kind of boring once, in like 2018, everyone acted like it had just come out and that no one had ever played Survival before. It was kind of funny, but it needs to be a more dynamic experience and more interesting, simply in the case of streaming and stuff like that. From a player perspective, I think it needs to be better than the first game was as well, but that's a whole different discussion. Then the final bit here, a raid date. So we don't have a hard date on when the raid is going to drop now, since it's been delayed. I've heard speculation of May 16th, but at the end of the day, I actually don't think it's probably even finalized at this point. We just got phase 2 of the PTS. I suspect they'll test that for at least a week, and then they'll need to make like final changes. I don't know if they will take PTS phase 2, see those changes, see how they work, and then make final changes and then release the patch. I don't know if they'll do a whole nother week of PTS to test the final changes. Who knows? I will say that I really hope that the patch drops like a week or maybe even more before they actually drop the raid. Because if they make all these changes and they drop the patch and the raid on the exact same day at the exact same time, you're going to have this raid drop and you're going to have a ton of people with builds that have completely crapped themselves because all the changes. People are going to need a week or two at least to make changes to their builds, to refarm for new gear, to kind of get their builds back in order. At least that's my opinion. I hope that's how they handle it. And yeah, there's the Division news for this week. So next we roll into the super smooth transition of mid-roll time. Okie dokie. So now we have, I'm going to do a little bit of a topic, communities, discussion and stuff like that. So I want to do just some quick story speculations. If you check out my YouTube page, it's just Bond Diesel on YouTube. I have a series I did in Division 1 that I'm kind of bringing back for Division 2 called Intel Insights. And this week I did one with all of the Black Tusk recordings that you find around the game. And the very last recording is basically the Black Tusk talking about how whoever's paying them, whoever is in charge. So what people need to realize about the Black Tusk is that they're a PMC, a private military company. So the things they're doing in DC and on the East Coast and in the East, I guess, it's not like their personal prerogative. So like the LMB in the first game was also a PMC, a private military group. But what happened with them is that they were assigned to Wall Street to protect all the assets there. Once everything completely hit the fan, they Bliss basically said, hey, we're not LMB anymore, really. We're not doing what the LMB wants anymore. We need to survive on our own, and we need to take over. We can become the top dogs here. And that was so they assigned their own desires for what they were doing in New York City. The Black Tusk appears to be just a really well-funded group, a really well-funded PMC, which I suspect is actually the remnants of the LMB, but don't hold me to that. Or not the remnants, the majority that the LMB became Black Tusk, but we'll have to wait and see. But that they aren't doing this stuff on their own prerogative. They're doing it because someone is paying them tons of money to do it, and probably promising them power and influence and all that stuff. And what you find at the end of the recordings of the Black Tusk stuff is that there may be some wavering there. There's some heavy hinting that that they may even try to work on the same side as the Shade Agents, as the Division. So I'm definitely curious to see how that goes in the long run. They don't seem as idealistic as the LMB was and stuff like that. It seems like they are up to the highest bidder, as you could say. So we will have to see. The hunters are always going to be a topic of conversation. I've seen, there's still speculation that people think that they're Russians or they're a foreign military unit. There's people who think that they're being run by Keener, that they're first wave agents. So my theory for a long time has been that they are a different branch of the Division. As they're meant to be like an insurance for rogue agents, or simply maybe to be used to just get rid of agents in general. At the end of the day, these agents all seem to have good intentions for the most part, but when the crisis, quote unquote, ends, how do you take that power back away from them? I suspect it's going to be harder than you think, because once you give people that amount of power, it's hard to give it up. So I still think that the hunters are some branch of the division, but that's a complete guess. Basically, the only reason I really believe that is because they just have similar tech as us, if not superior in a lot of ways, and that's the only thing that makes sense to me. The issue is that the Black Tusk have essentially taken that role a little bit, so it's made me start to question my own theory quite a bit. But I don't know. I'm definitely interested. I'm curious to see the hunters. Man, the hunters are a thing where, as much as I want to know a lot about them, I simply I hope that we never learn everything about them. I hope that there isn't just some complete info drop where we now know the hunters 100%, because the mystery around them is what makes them so interesting. I think we need some tidbits to keep them, keep us curious. But I hope that we never learn every single detail. Kind of in that same vein is we have the Underground and the Ambusher factions. If you don't know who they are, I'm sure you've seen at least yourself, or even videos of like the chainsaw guy down in the sewers. That is a Underground faction. A lot of people think it's the Outcast. It's not. If you let them kill you, if you let that guy or his friends kill you, it shows them as a whole separate faction called the Underground, and their symbol is a chain. And if you kill these guys and you look at them, you'll notice that all of them have like chains all over them. I don't know if it's supposed to be armor or what, but it is what it is. There's another faction that is the easiest way to describe them is the guys with trash can lids who run at you, typically at night. You also almost always see these guys at the beginning of, well, it's either these guys or the Underground, at the beginning of the federal bunker. It seems like they're always down there. And the Ambusher faction, they're most notably the guys with bows and trash can lids. I've found that when I find these guys, a lot of times I get ambushed by them. Go figure. They have like a tripwire that they set up across like sidewalks and streets at night, and so you'll get flashed and you won't be able to see it all, and then you'll have dudes with axes and trash can lids in your face. If you let them kill you, you'll see that their faction is called the Ambusher, or Ambushers, and I believe their symbol is like a guy with like a handkerchief over his mouth and like a hat. I'm pretty sure. And so I'm really curious to what they're going to do with these two factions. If you post about them on Twitter, the devs like Julian Garrity and stuff will be like, what's an Underground? What's an Ambusher? What are you guys talking about? So I suspect, my guess is that the third DLC, the final DLC of year one, is going to involve these factions in some capacity. The only way that these factions are worked into the story is at the end of the Navy Hill secret mission. The lady that you find down in the bunker, she gives you a secret mission, and at the end of the mission you have to kill I think it's an Underground boss, Underground faction boss, but they don't acknowledge them. There's none. If you let the Underground and the Ambusher faction, if you let them kill you and read the little blurbs about them, because the way you can look at the archetype details and stuff, it normally just says they're kind of funny. Normally, I think one is from Agent Kelso saying, that you need to watch your kidneys when you're out at night because these ambushers will take them from you or something. So I've seen people speculate that the Underground and Ambusher factions are like branches off of the Outcast or something like that. I suspect there's something completely different. I don't know if they are related themselves, but I suspect that they're supposed to be little hints to maybe some stuff in the third DLC. Because if you look at the release of the media they've put out about the DLCs, the third one is supposed to be like wrapping up the year 1 story and preparing us for the year 2 story. And so, the year 2, I think that's a pretty good time to introduce 2 whole new factions, and bring up, all new strongholds, all new control points being taken by certain people and stuff like that. I'm also curious too, the DLC 2 is going to be at the Pentagon, and there's been heavy hints that it will be an underground-ish type of DLC, and so I'm wondering if these factions are going to have something to do with that as well. But we'll have to wait and see. And the last little bit of speculation here, I still going back to the NYC After Dark. So there's a side mission. It's one of these secret side missions that you get where you have to help these art curators get some stuff and protect some stuff at a art museum. And the exhibit that was on display at this art museum is this exhibit called NYC After Dark. And what's so interesting about it is that it talks about a return to New York, and it mentions, I believe, January. It specifically talks about coming in January. I think that's pretty significant. Obviously, that may just be, kind of a nod back to New York City. But I think that's too convenient. I honestly think that is, I think that's too easy, to be totally honest. I think that's, I think it has to be a Easter egg or a wink wink to content that's coming. So if you've heard me talk about it before, I'm sorry that you have to hear it again, but one of my big theories is that this is hinting to some kind of return to New York City. And I think that if we get another survival mode, it's actually could be placed back in New York City. I think that's possible. What I really think is that the survival mode is going to be the first DLC that we get here in a couple months, and that it will be based in the northeast region, northeast of the current map. If you look at the Phoenix Edition map, there's a paper map that came with the Phoenix Edition of the game. Up in the northeast of our current playable map, there's in red writing, there's who will be the last or something written. So I think that's what's going to happen. Then I think that the DLC, the third DLC, is maybe going to introduce some kind of like excursions. If you've seen Far Cry New Dawn, there's this system there where you can do these excursions to other parts of the country in Far Cry and collect supplies from other notable parts of the country. What I think is that there's going to be some type of system with that in the third DLC where we're gonna go to like contaminated zones around the northeast or the east coast or whatever, and I think one of those could be New York City. What I also believe, and here's some spoilers from the book and the comic if you haven't read them already, so skip like a minute or something. In the book and the comic, there's basically a revelation that the Black Tusk are coming to DC, but they've also gone to other major fuel depots in the East Coast to take over all the fuel depots in a bunch of these cities in order to basically win the war, to control the United States, because those who have the fuel control everything. And so I'm wondering if we're going to go on excursions to these locations that have these fuel depots, and that's going to be that mechanic. And one of those places could be, like the southern tip of Manhattan. But I don't know. We'll have to see. It's fun to speculate on. Next here, we'll have some listener questions. First, we had Jot and Thrash 666. They ask, do you think the changes they're currently doing to nerf NPCs are being dealt out too quickly as to appease the quote-unquote haters? Gonna be totally honest, not a big fan of the phrase like haters. I don't think people complaining about the difficulty of the game are haters. I think that they're just having trouble with the game. I don't know. We'll have to see. Once I made a damage to elites build, I realized that the PvE in this game is relatively easy. So I hope they don't nerf the NPCs too badly. But I think more than anything, like player education might be a bigger part of the problem. I've seen people complain about like content creators who make build videos and they ruin the game because they make everyone use the same builds. I think that's bullcrap. I think it's so hard to perfectly replicate someone's build that when people watch those videos, they make a build that's similar, and then they, and it helps them learn about the builds and how things work, and then they adjust them to their gear and to their own preferences. So I think that they could go too far with nerfing the NPCs. But I think they're trying to find a good happy balance. And I think on top of that, a really smart thing would be to do some like official videos, or even change some things actually in the game, in the UI and stuff, that would help people who don't really understand like RPG mechanics very well, to understand like, hey, this piece might be better for you because it will raise this stat that is useful or something. I don't know. I think that's a thing that would have to be designed, hard coded into a game from the beginning. We obviously don't have that now, and so I'm kind of curious to how that would be. The alternative there may even be to have some system where there's like links in the game. Maybe there's like a help section in the game where they could work with some content creators, big and small, to make videos about like, how to make a PvE build. So it doesn't tell people like, hey, you need this piece and that piece and the other, but instead it may say, hey, do you want to play some PvE? Focus on damage to elites, damage to armor, weapon damage stats, some survivability stuff. I think that could be just as useful. But no, we'll have to see. But no, I don't think that they're doing too much yet, but we'll have to see. Nitro comes in asking, what do you think of the loot pacing in Division 2? Feeling rewarded for the time spent. Are there times that you notice the grind more than others? So I don't have any issues with how much loot we get. I think we get a ton, even from just running like open world. I feel like you can get a ton. I feel like the drops are kind of weird. I've noticed that I drop almost no assault rifles. And that may just be my RNG, or maybe there's something programmed in. I think it's rewarding in the quantity, but the quality may not be quite as much. Then your second question is, can a live service game have an end game? So I mean, I think it can have an end game. I think that's been demonstrated multiple times. Division, Destiny, Warframe. But an actual end to the game may be a different story. In Division, the first game basically had no end to the story. It just kind of paused until 3 years for Division 2 to come out. And I kind of expect Division 2 to be the same way at the end of the day. I think that there's more story there, but I don't expect it to miraculously wrap up nice and tidy any story leads or anything like that. So from a end game, like things to do as an end game activity, grinding gear, optimizing builds, completing challenging content, definitely I think it can. When it comes to like wrapping a story up, I haven't really seen one do it well. I mean, I know Warframe is known for its really good storylines, but it's more like little episodes that are really good, and not really the overarching story ever gets really wrapped up, because then they can't keep making stuff for it. So I don't know. I hope that answered the question. DB Conquest says, if you can add another faction, what would they be? What would their background be and types of people who would join them? So one faction idea I had before Division 2 even came out is I was actually hoping the Hunters would become a type of faction on their own. And by that, I mean, I was hoping that the Hunters would develop that there'd be like different types of Hunters. So there'd be like a tank hunter that would have like a shield, that there'd be like a specific, I know there is a sniper hunter, but even more so, something even more specialized. In fact, with the sniper hunter, my idea would use some type of Ghost Recon Future Soldier tech, where they could become like invisible until they shot. Obviously, I'm sure people have mixed feelings on that type of thing, but so that was definitely one I really wanted to see. And it would be a way for them to kind of lightly bring in more lore and story to the Hunters without completely giving us everything. But I'm not expecting that at this point. As for any other factions, I would say like like a settlement gone bad. Because the outcasts aren't really that way, because they're like angry, they're revenge, they're payback for, you know, putting them on the quarantine island. So I would say that they're just more of like a revenge faction. The True Sons, you know, they're the former JTF people, so that's their background. The Hyenas are just kind of a ragtag group of, you know, gang leaders and stuff. They're all working together and are recruiting people to fight with them. So I still think that there's room in there for like an angry civilian faction. And if anything, they could be a faction that is, you know, fairly reasonable in a lot of ways. Like, you know, they're just trying to take their piece of land. You know, they're essentially like the campus and the theater, but they don't want to work with anyone because they, you know, I think the what's the settlement off the top of my head? The castle settlement very well could end up, you know, it could be a really interesting one as a kind of like a rogue settlement where they're like, no, man, we asked you to protect us. You know, the other settlements didn't help us in our time of need. You know, we got wiped off the earth. Now we're taking this back and we're not going to be friendly with everyone. That could be a whole new stronghold, maybe. Probably not. Like, I recognize that's probably not going to be a thing, but and the people who join them are people who, you know, don't want to join the crazy outcast. They don't want to join the scary hyenas, and they aren't former JTF or military, so they can't join the True Sons. So I don't know, I think that'd be kind of a neat one. But there's also a reason I'm not a game writer and a creator, because that's probably not really the most interesting idea ever. But thank you for the question. Then the last one here from Hassan. After seeing the new patch notes for the PTS, do you think some of the stuff as upgrading Anaya to the vendor was planned from the beginning? Do you think that we will see other NPC being upgraded to different roles like Manny now? Oh yeah. No, that's a really good question. Yeah, I suspect the Anaya thing was planned from the beginning, definitely. Even her setup at the crafting station looks like a vendor. And maybe I'm wrong, but the assets to make her into a vendor, I assume aren't that simple, that in just a few weeks they can just throw her, you know, make that happen. I suspect there had to be some kind of underpinning, you know, design for that. Maybe, but I could be wrong. When it comes to the other NPCs, I think your point about Manny standing up there by the DZ NPC is really interesting. I didn't really think about that, but it is kind of convenient. He definitely looks like he's just waiting for a prompt above his head to talk to him. And yeah, I think that's absolutely possible. Maybe my idea about these excursions, maybe, or even the Pentagon, or even this first DLC that we don't, the outskirts that we don't know much about, maybe that's going to be a place that we go and talk to him and get missions or get, you know, activities or something. But yeah, I think I definitely don't think the Anaya thing is new. I think that was planned, and I absolutely think that your idea there about the other NPCs being utilized is absolutely possible. Okay, and then now, so we'll do some content updates. So I'm gonna try, as hopefully you could tell in this podcast, to focus more on game-related discussions and staying away from the quote-unquote community drama as a main topic. And maybe just kind of include it as little bits of Division news, kind of like how I talked about the dropping Twitch viewership. It's really kind of a drag for me, and you know, I kind of took this week off because I was just kind of feeling kind of overwhelmed and kind of annoyed, and I figured that there's lots of reasons for it that aren't in my control, but ones that are in control, like always focusing on it and stuff, the drama and so on. It's just a drag. It's boring. It's not fun or interesting really to talk about. It's just so I'm gonna try to stay away from it for the most part. There may be exceptions, but you know, for the most part, I'm gonna try to just focus on the game because there's plenty to talk about. I also am gonna try to get more into the Intel Insights. I recorded 3 of them last week. 2 of them are already out on my YouTube. You can find me on there as Bond Diesel. And I have one more coming out, I believe, on Tuesday for about the Division. And then in the background, I'm working on a longer form review of Division 2, and I want to kind of make the review specifically from the perspective of a huge fan, a fanboy, someone who's been treated really well by the devs and the community managers, and like kind of a, like, I know I'm biased review to kind of give that perspective. So I'm kind of working on that. And that's about it. So if you want to support the podcast, like I said at the beginning, I do have a Patreon. There's some deals going on with that, and there's some really cool rewards to it, including this podcast a couple days early. I'm going to start releasing the podcast for free for everyone on Mondays, and putting it on the Patreon immediately, so typically on Saturdays. If you want that little bit of a head start, I hope that's not too much. If you have feedback about that, please let me know, but I don't think it's that bad. From my numbers, from the stats, most of you listen during the week anyways. But that is on Patreon. You can look up the EchoCast on Patreon. If you like the podcast, please follow on whatever platform that you are using. If you're on iTunes, please rate the podcast and leave a review. If you check the podcast out on YouTube and you want to see more, please sub the channel, like the video, and comment below. I had lots of things in there in this podcast. If you want to be heard or give your opinion, I'd be happy to hear it. I am on Twitch, where I stream multiple times a week, and on Twitter, both as Bond Diesel, where you can find some other content links as well. And that's what I have this week. So, until next time.